Thanks for coming out tonight. Yeah, so I teach, like Larry says, I teach watercolor in Queens at the National Art League and also at the Atelier at Flowerfield. And it is still up and running, okay? It's because a lot of people think that it's been closed, but it's not. The Atelier has been operating since the beginning of the new year. So just so you guys know that it's still operational. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a place in Oregon. What was the name of the place, Carol? You forgot already? I know.
Carol, not me.
Oh.
You can answer. Go ahead.
Okay, it's called Cape Disappointment. I just hope the demo won't be a disappointment. But if it is, I have some things that I have done at home just to kind of facilitate the whole process. In watercolor, we have to think in big shapes usually. So it's not, because we can't, watercolorists can't go back over what we painted like oil painters can. So what we have to do is we have to think our compositions through. So in order to get a good, strong composition with lights and darks, and every good painting has an equal amount of medium, dark, and light in the composition to, just to enhance whatever scene that we're painting. So what I normally do is, if I'm painting something that I have never painted before, what I do is I do a little, I don't know if this helps doing this way, but, or well, if I do that, it'll be upside down, right? So this is, and I'm going to hand you guys are going to pass them around so you can see them. But this is just a quick impression of my photo reference. Okay, I had done some things too in Photoshop to change the composition around a little bit. And you'll probably, I don't have anything else, but here you'll probably see this one. This was the one done with the old composition. I just moved the lighthouse over. Again, helping the design, I just put it on the law of thirds, so that actually became a part of, and I know it's a played out way to design a landscape or a still life, but it always works. You know, there's something to be said. If the cinematographers are using the law of thirds, why can't the artists? Okay, so that's it. This is actually on the third plane, the horizontal and the vertical. And right there, that could be the center of interest, or it's just a point of reference. So here, or focal point, depending on what you're looking at. There's actually a couple of things in here that could be, the light effects could be considered focal points in the painting. So this, I'm going to give you guys this one to pass around. You guys can start around. And then this is my color study, okay? Wow. And we're gonna do this too. So I paint very loose, as you can see. This mount right here is really not going. There's not much going on. It's dry brush, light washes. There's some. I do add a little bit of an opaque wash over certain things when I need a little bit of atmosphere. But for the most part, this is the same as my reference, okay? And this is what we're going to do tonight. And I'll show you how we went about this one too. We'll start with, and I'm going to start, you pass that one around. Since I did it already, I pretty much have it in my mind what it's going to look like. So since I'm working on like a half sheet here, I'm going to use my 1.5 inch brush. This is, I use these silver black velvet brushes. They're half squirrel and half nylon. Okay, so I'm going to make a big amount of, and you guys can see how much I'm putting down in here.
Where'd you buy the brush?
I got it through Blix. They don't, you have to actually order, they don't sell these at Blix, you have to order them. They have a little 3-pack that I get some of my students to buy. But you have to really order them by the brush. They're very good, they're very reliable. I had these for over 2 years now, and I do a lot of watercolor painting, and they really hold up. So here I'm trying to get a little blue in my sky. I'm trying to get something now that's a lot, right? You would think that this is going to be just our sky tone. Okay. Now, the one big thing about painting in watercolor, if it looks good when you put it down, what's the answer? No, it's wrong. Because why would it be wrong? That's right, it changes value, yes. Sometimes color too, it gets a little muddy. So, I'm making, this is actually going to be just that sky color that you see on the reference, all right? But I'm going to go a little darker because I want to make sure that I'm covering this whole thing. And basically, this is just going to be this is just the wash, okay? Now, another thing in painting in watercolor, don't be afraid. You got to go fast. You got to move, okay? I'm not painting. You notice I'm not painting wet into wet. And the reason for that is that I want my color, I mean, even though this is gray, I want my colors to be, enhanced. If I did this wet into wet, I would have to make a darker primary, I would have to make a darker wash. So what would happen if I screwed up on that darker wash? Then I'd be in a lot of trouble, okay? Yeah, it might get diluted, but for the most part, I can control a wash like this as long as I work fast, okay? And don't worry about, now another thing too, you guys in the front row can see this, there's a lot of little hairs in there. Don't try to pick the hairs out, leave them in there. Because if you try to pick them out, you'd be chasing little, things all night. Wait for them to dry and they'll flake right off, okay? So now this is looking definitely dark. I'm going to give it a little bit more of a wash up here in the sky. Okay. I really want to, even though this is just like an ugly gray, I still want to saturate my paper with this. The paper is not stretched, by the way, because I know some people like to, especially when they're working on single sheets.
Now that he's started, what size is the paper?
This one, I forgot, it's 15 by 20. Oh, this is, okay, so the paper I use is a 140 pound cold press.
It has to be tilted down or down.
Can you see this okay? Alright, so I have my trusty blow dryer.
What is the paper you're using?
The paper is 140, Arches 140, cold press. I like the cold press because it has a texture. So when I do dry brushing, you're able to see, texture, as opposed to hot press, where it's too slick. Okay, so what I do is when I make a gray, or I make, basically instead of using black, I'll use ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Now the reason why I do that is because I can get a cool black or gray. If I use more ultramarine blue, or if I want to use more, if I want a warmer tone, I'll just use the burnt umber, a little bit more burnt umber to that mixture, to the blue. So it's actually a good neutral tone. I found it kind of mimics Payne's gray a little bit. What's that? Because I like to either change the temperature to go warm if it's 50-50, it's Payne's gray, or thereabouts. So right now, this is giving me a nice neutral tone. Plus, I don't like red. I don't like using anything that's not a color. I only use Payne's gray when I do those black and white studies. So, before I put any other wash on this thing, I have to make sure that this is completely dry. I'm sorry, did you have a question? Okay, so that's it. Yeah. Now, I'm just testing the gray. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, very good.
Now, there's another thing too that you guys could use or not use. It's up to you. I know you're all professional painters and artists. So, if let's say you don't have like if you can't see it right away, or if you're trying to match a color to a given value, sometimes that can be hard to do. Sometimes this helps just to show like where you are. And what I like to do is when I try to discern a value, like I'll squint. I usually tell my students to always squint at something, and you obliterate all the detail, and you just see the intrinsic value of whatever given shape. But by here, so I can say this is pretty much value, whatever this is, value 8, and it's value 8 here. So this is just kind of like a value checker, but that's a little academic.
Can you purchase that?
Yeah, you can get this there like $3 or something. All right, so let's get into the painting. And so just like any other painting in landscape, we work from the back to the front. And since this is a pretty good sized painting, I'm going to use like, what is this, 18? And so my background color is going to be, I'm going to start with a cobalt blue and a little permanent green. And let's see. I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of that neutral color, because everything in nature isn't as primary as we think it is. And again, remember,
Can you see it?
can you see this?
Not really.
No.
I see the
You
whole
have
front
to
row of
move the
people.
mirror.
The mirror is.
The mirror needs to be tipped a little more.
No, we can see
Which
it's good
way?
back here.
That's good, that's good.
That's good.
That's fine.
Little more, little more.
Okay, so I have to have enough paint here to make sure I do this whole section. So, let's see, I'm going to bring some more of that paint in here. So the reason why I went from the cobalt blue to the permanent green, and then I dipped into my mixture that I had before, is that I want to try to get something that's not so, it's still a hazy day, so I don't want it too dark. You can put a little brush down, like a little thing down, just a little swatch. If it looks like it's too dark, then just add some more water. We have to remember, we want to try to create depth in our painting, so I'm putting a lot more water in here. I didn't like that little mark that it made. It should almost be like a ghosted, almost like a value darker than the sky. So you have to kind of think in terms of, well, how dark do we have to get that mass, right? So I can look at this and I can say, well, that's probably this one, right? somewhere between these two. And it's never an exact science when you're looking at one of these things. So it's probably going to be somewhere here, but I don't want to make it that dark. I don't want to make it as dark as my reference. I do want to make it a little lighter, and I think on those sketches, I kind of pushed it up and made it a tiny bit lighter. And that was only to really push back that background a little bit more. Okay. And of course, understanding that we are going to, this is going to lighten up too. Okay. So here, this is where I got to start moving. If you guys want to see an ending to this show. Right. Now, making trees, if you guys watched any of those YouTube videos, it's almost like a calligraphy, okay? You got to think of it in terms of, you're not really making a tree, right? You're making these abstracted shapes, okay? And I'm using a lot of color here because I do want to saturate this background. And I start, pretty much with my trunk. And work my way down. Always remember those, especially in watercolor, those sky holes, because you can't go back and fill them in. All right, they have to be done now. All right, so let's see. And we can change the size of the brush too. I should have probably started over here. This is an 18. It's a soaker brush. And of course, this is the black silver squirrel. I always feel like saying it's moose and squirrel, like Rocky and Bullwinkle. But it's squirrel and nylon. So you see I'm still just dancing around. Now when I see that my brush is starting to run out of gas, then you just add a little bit more water. And if you make a mark, right? Let's say you make a mark and you don't have enough paint, just touch the tip of the brush into that area. What will happen is the water just follows the path, and it will just make these. It'll just go right into those shapes. I'll also show you guys how to just do, like, we'll do a tree. I might throw in a little bit of, like, let's say it's fall, and you can do that too, like where let's say you make your tree shape. Now these are fir trees, I assume. All you have to do is just add like a little bit of a brownish tone to this. All right, so now let's see. Now I want this whole shape to pretty much be the same value, more or less. Because again, we're thinking in terms of big shapes first, right? It's almost like when we paint in oil. I'm sure a lot of you guys paint more oil than watercolor. When you block in something, you block it in with a tone, even if it's in the beginning of the painting. You just try to get an average in. Well, with watercolor painters and painting itself, you have to know that those areas are going to be, relatively flat and consistent too. Like we can change the values in here. In fact, you see where some of these are a little darker and some of them are a little lighter. Like you remember I was talking about before where, okay, maybe I might want to get this a little darker. All I'm doing is I don't know if you guys can see that, it's kind of small. I wish I had a camera on this thing. But right now I can drop in other colors. So let's say I wanted to add, there's another color here, and I'm going to use another brush because I don't want to take away from this. Since this is my major color, I'm going to use a little bit of this. This is like a cerulean blue hue. It's very, very light, but it's kind of nice. And if I want to just drop that in, I just have to get a little bit more water to it. I can actually turn my background a little bluer. Actually, that's going right in. I don't know if you guys can see that. But that will eventually bleed in. Another thing too, it's like, whoop, gotta be careful here. Right? So we keep this going on a downward plane. Right?
Use the dryer.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the dryer on in a minute. It's wet enough where it's coming right away. There we go. And I can go back up there and just add some more to the tips there. So I can't do that. All right. So let's put this together here. Now, with the exception of the lighthouse, can you guys see this? I just want to build this up a little bit more. I do have a drawing under here that I made this morning, and I'm just following my drawing. Now I'm going to take some of that blue that I had before, and I'm just going to start making some of these abstracted shapes. Be careful not to go over. Just made enough to make it across. Now, some artists leave little holes in there, and we could, but I want to try to keep this, it's really the lights, this is kind of backlit, so I want to have my light effect more in the front of this thing. All right, so now is the time I can start adding some embellishments to this mass. But I don't want to go too dark. So I'm just going to go like a value or so darker than the average here, and I'm just going to find some areas that I want to just accentuate to make a little darker. Now I am working wet into wet. But if we look at the composition, you can see that there are some areas that get a little blue. They're a little bit more blue in areas. And we have to put those colors in now. This is the best time. And keep it flat. All right, so I'm seeing this blue in here. Okay. This is where you can get creative. You can do some just making shapes, okay? It's all about the abstraction, okay, when you start. Just like anything else, when you start a face, if you do a portrait artist, you know, you start with the general shapes, and then you go in, you start adding features. Here we're adding embellishments at this point. Now I don't want to go too crazy with the colors here. I just want to get dark enough so I can have my little highlight on the rock right here, okay? So I'm going to try to isolate that later. And the next step is going to be doing painting in the lighthouse for now. And then I'll probably also add just a little bit of stuff to the trees. Now I'm keeping them very simple for now. I would add some. I've got to be careful because that's still a little wet. another thing to do too is, now watch how I'm holding the brush, right? I'm not holding the brush, because I just found myself doing something that I shouldn't have done. And you want to try to just hold it, almost hold the brush as if you're just gliding the tip over. You would get more of a spontaneous line that way than if you tried to hold it like you're writing, okay? And this is pretty much holds true for, painting in oil as well. Okay. Now, there's another technique too, but I'm not going to do it with this painting at this point. Like if I wanted to get these to be softer, I would give this a little spray, and I would have but I don't have time to go back and do the trees over again, because we got to get into the other rocks. Okay, so again, I'm just going in for little embellishments here. I'm keeping some of those little tree holes or the sky holes in. All right, that looks good. And for now, and we're going to make the, let's see, so I squint at the lighthouse and I see that it's white, but it's white that's backlit, so I'm going to say that it's a blue. Okay. Now I can also assign a little bit of a color to it too, so I'm going to add a little purple. All right, this is the time you guys can get colorful with your work. Remember, we're not working on white anymore. We're working on gray, like a 5% gray. So everything that we do, we can get, think a little more color, but not too much. Okay, I put just enough purple in here to keep it within the poster, and what that means is that I want it to look like a silhouette. All right, I don't want it to have any like colors that are going to jump out, because things that are in the in silhouette don't have color usually. Okay, all the colors happening behind the thing. All right, it's like looking into the sun and looking at your hand, in front of the sun or the sky. What do you see? You see a silhouette. All right, so you have to remember that when you're painting. Don't overdo the things that are backlit, okay? Because you go against nature, okay? Backlit things are usually flat. I mean, there's a little, unless the sun's hitting the top edges, then add them in. But if they're not, don't paint anything you don't see. Okay, so I see.
What's the number of that, bro?
So this one is a 12. So I'm sticking with all the bigger ones here. This is a bigger piece of paper. Now, if I was painting these trees a little closer up, I probably would have a different approach. I probably have, if they were, let's say, darker, I would definitely use like the dry brush technique. There'd be more paint on the brush than there is here. Okay, good. All right. Any questions so far? Because we're done with the background for now.
What color do you use in your trees? I mean, in your bark of the tree?
In the bark, okay, so if I was...
Yeah, the trunk,
Okay, so if I was to put bark in here, it would be a darker version of this same green. Again, because everything would be pretty much monochromatic because it's backlit. All right, so I wouldn't do anything other than just making those embellishments a little darker. And I can see, like in here, now as long as people who know how have been painting in watercolor. Veterans, you know that if it's shiny, that means it's still wet. That means you can still paint into that wash. So what I want to do now is I want to add just a little bit more blue right in here. I want to have something that's just a darker embellishment now, okay? Now the dark blue is really, it's not really that dark, but that's representing a shadow color. Okay, that's basically shadows where the light must be turning around or coming through. Watch for this spin. Okay, now this is actually starting to dry. Okay, I can tell by the way the edges look, which is okay because I wanted those little lights in here. All right, so I got lucky. Another thing too, like when you get good at watercolor, you'll know how to change. Like you'll know when the surface is wet enough to take a wetted to wet wash, or when you just have to have a let's say just a softer edge, because there are times when it's soaking wet and there's time when it's damp. And then there's a time when you don't want to put anything on your watercolor, because what will happen is, what do you get?
Blossom.
Blossom, exactly. So, but that's tricky. That's when you have to really know your medium, because usually people get the cabbage or blossom. However, I've seen artists actually use that to their credit, where it was a painting of. It was a beautiful painting, and it wasn't that big because they had to control those blossoms, but it was an underwater scene of like a coral bed. And they used them, and it looked great. I mean, you can almost see the shapes working. And what were we talking about before? It's the abstraction. So if you can get the abstraction, your mind's eye finishes the painting, okay? So now this is going to get a little lighter. But we still have some of the greens, okay, the permanent green is still kind of showing through. There's actually blotches, which is great. That's what you want. And why do we want those blotches? Because we're going to be playing off those blotches if I have time later on. You use some of those inflections where it gets a little darker and lighter. That's where you can go in and you can accent them. And we'll give it a spray, and I'll show you how to do that later, but we got to start moving. What time? What do I have until 8:30 or 8?
10:30.
8:30? 10:30. Oh, the rate I'm going, okay. I better shut
I'm
that down.
surprised you get a big brush you use for a layout. I would think you would use something small.
No. See, that's the thing. You start using smaller brushes and you have a tendency to get too detailed too soon. So yeah, so you want to try to keep everything broad. I think today in class I was using a very big brush on a very small painting. And well, what it does is it helps you move along quicker, but you also, if you're going to use a larger brush, because we were trying to fill in a dark background in a painting. The idea is to have, you want to have that, so I think I don't know if it was this brush, Carol, was it this one? And your painting was like that big, and I just loaded it, and this is a super soaker brush. This thing, I think it's as large, it's a jumbo round. And you load something like this, and you can cover a section, probably half of this sheet, without even re-wetting the brush if it's loaded enough. All right, so sometimes these things really come in handy. You have to know when to use them and then control them. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do this mass in here. So notice I'm using recycling, okay? I'm going to take this paint, okay, and now I'm going to start adding some stuff to this, because it's all in the family, right? It's all the same. It's the, what do they call that? The mother color, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to try to keep that together. I mean, it's going to be a different color, but why go through another wash when I already have something that I won't need anymore because the background is done? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding some blue to this, and I will be getting it darker. And this is like, it's basically a mud right now. And now you probably wonder, well, why would you want to paint with mud? Well, because in painting, all right, if you had a painting of all bright colors, you would have an uninteresting painting. John Sargent painted, and there's actually they say that you use a dirty complement to enhance a color. So in his portraits, a lot of times his backgrounds were like these ugly. It looked like the color that he just took from his palette and just mixed it up and put it in the background. Well, it works because you can't have all bright color all over, and if you want to paint naturalistically. So here we're going to add just a little bit more brown to this, and I just really want a base here, okay? And I want to go a little darker than that. So that was like my little test color, test strip. So remember, if you want to have something jump out, my brushes have a tendency to spit, but that's just the way I paint. So here, and I got to get this darker, definitely. So I'm just going to add a little bit more ultramarine to that. Now the reason why I'm making this darker is because I don't want to go over this more than twice. The trick is, it's like in watercolor, you don't want to, more than 3 washes, it's going to start looking labored. All right. So I'm just going to follow my light pattern in here. And this is where, now this brush might look big, but it's really not. But I'm getting the breakup of light and dark in here. All the little striations. And as long as that's, let's see, as long as I get a nice dark in here. Now notice what I'm doing with these colors. I'm trying to get these swells of light and dark patterns in the paint. That's going to help me later on when I have to try to find interest in the rock, like lights and darks. And yes, I'm going to probably be putting lights and darks in there too, and changing the color. So right now I want to get this nice silhouette, basically. That's what I'm doing. I'm silhouetting this rock formation with this mud. But here, I'm drawing in, what would be the negative, right? So I'm leaving my highlights open. And then right now we have that little bluff, that point that comes down. And this is where you don't have to draw exactly to the photograph. That's usually where people start to make their artwork look a little bit too contrived. Don't notice I'm referencing my photograph, but I'm not a slave to the photograph. Okay, that's one good way to get an uninteresting painting. All right, so now that we got the mud down, or the black top, I'm going to start adding some color to that. All right. So you probably wonder, well, why didn't you mix the colors together, Bill, before you put it down? Well, I'm letting the water mix my color. Okay, I'm going to start putting in some color here, and it's just going to kind of sit on top. Okay, and I'm going to put some browns in here since everything is still wet. Okay, maybe not so much over here, but here it looks like it's pretty brown. Okay, plus if you notice, there's a little steam coming off the water, and make that another color. So there are tiers, and there's areas in here where, okay, so I feel good about this second tier now. It's darker than the background. But this one's a little cooler, so I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue in there. See, the thing is, if I started with too much color, what would happen is, and I wasn't. Now there are artists that can paint, and get the color to match the value right away. I like to put down. I like to get the value first and then put the color in. I work the same way in oil. So if I'm painting a portrait, I'll put the color embellishments, if let's say there's like a green or bluish halftone, I'll do that after I mass in, say, what they call like the dead coloring, you know, just the basic color. Like sometimes you'll just mix a flesh tone that approximates the sitter's complexion. All right, so in here, I'm going to do the same thing up here. I see that it needs a little interest, and I'm going to start adding. So while this is wet, I could do a ton of things to this. Now you can see that this is, it's definitely getting more colorful. And I also want to add a little bit of, let's see, I'm going to go back to this color now, this tint, because it almost has it's a cerulean blue hue, but it has like, it's very opaque. You see how it's almost like there's white added to this, but really there isn't any white in it at all. It's just a good color. I don't know.
Looks like sunshine.
It does, right?
Yeah, if you give it a little glare to it.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that. Now this, I know this is going to get, this is definitely going to get lighter right after I spray it. Let's see. Now I'm just going to look, this is where I have to be careful. I want to add some other color in here. And just really, this is more for form than anything right now. Thank you, Karen.
I'm so quiet.
Can't take me anywhere.
All right, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take the tip. Notice I'm just taking the tip of the brush and I'm just touching these areas in here. The reason for this is that I want to get I want to make sure that my edges and everything are really intense, right? So I'm just reinforcing the edges on this. Usually when we're painting form, usually you have like a dark, especially if it's a silhouetted form, you'll have like an area that's very dark just before it gets light. It's almost like a core shadow. Well, that's what this kind of is. So I want to try to get this to be as dark as I can get it here. Again, understanding that this is going to get darker, lighter as we go forward and when I dry it. All right, so right now I'm going to just run this little line right across here. Try to get that straight, but not too straight. Okay, you don't want like perfect straight lines. In fact, I think I'm going to run a dry brush line across there. Just a little one. So how do we dry brush? Well, we gotta have a dry brush for dry brush, but it has to be just the right dryness. It's weird. And you gotta move fast. All right, that's all I wanted. Now, let's try this. Because this rock over here, this formation, totally different approach. And you see what will happen now. I just want to show you another technique too. So let's say this looks pretty good, it's close to the value that's in the photograph, but I want to add some detail and some striations to the rock or whatever. I'm gonna take the same color I had before. Okay. Now this is a little damp now, so because I don't want a super hard edge. So right now, this is where I'm going to start redrawing some of my shapes, okay? And now I am going to start looking at my picture a little bit more. And I'm going to say, well, yeah, I think I want a little bluff here. I want to leave some of that color coming through. It's probably just a change in the rock formation. Again, I want to work on my edges. Maybe I can't do dry brushing now, but I will when I dry this. So I'm just adding these little kind of whatever they are, okay? It's just form, okay? But you got to work pretty fast and you got to know when to stop. And let's say you go a little too dark, then you just grab your paper towel and just use the extraction technique, where you just lift up the paint a little bit, okay? Nothing wrong with that. Whatever gets the effect, okay? I worked as an illustrator for a long time, so you had to kind of wing it as you went, okay? And just get however you got that effect, any means necessary, okay? In fact, I used to do a lot of these types of things for Reader's Digest very quickly, and People too. Let's see. And usually they give you 2 days to do an assignment, so you can't pussyfoot around. Okay, so here, now I want to make my own rock formations in here, so I'm making these little crevices and I'm adding different planes to my painting here. All right, so I got some dark areas in here. I broke up that one wash now, and I'm going to dry this, and I'll probably throw in a few little last-minute details. Now, when I say details, I just really mean accents, okay? Notice I'm not sitting here, I'm not making every little rock formation. That's crazy. I got a life. I got a binge watch hot with the tuna. Alright? So, I gotta go fish. So you see, when this is done, you guys can come up and you'll be able to see these subtleties. Kind of hard to see from far away. You guys in the back probably don't see anything. What's that?
No. No, we can see.
I should be looking up more, right? All right, okay, so now, okay. Okay, that's dry enough. Now, if it feels at all damp or clammy or cool, it's not thoroughly dry yet. All right, so here I said I was going to do some dry brushing to get some textures in here, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to do some dry brush effects running down throughout here, and that's it. Okay. Who said you couldn't do dry brush over an existing wash? All right, that's not true. You can do dry brush whenever and whenever. But what we have to do is we have to add some interest here. Okay, we can't leave that just white anymore because it's not white. So I'm going to throw a little, it looks like, I don't know, yellow ochre, maybe, and orange. I'll just put these colors in today. Just before you do a painting, if let's say your palette's been sitting around for a while, just give it a little spray. Just not getting the color anymore. All right. It's interesting, I was just teaching the class, that orange was a little too over the top. So, now you guys already know this. What do you do to neutralize a color? Well, you go to the complement. So that's what I did right here. I had a little bit of blue right next to that orange. So, here I'm going to start adding some color. And I'm going to be careful because I don't want to just put one color down, all right? So that just means that, oh, I got lazy. I'm just going to put one color where I see, you know, like these little ridges in here. I'm going to add a lot more. Okay. And just at the ridge, I'm probably going to add just a little bit of this yellow in. I also have to be careful not to go too intense. This way your eye won't know which way to go. But since we do have a wash, we have to always remember too that we have this, we're painting over like a gray. Okay, so everything that we do, especially with watercolor, right, you can actually see that when I put this color down, it's nowhere near the intensity that it would be if I was painting on white, right? So we have that, whether it's helping or hindering us too. Okay, so here I'm just adding these little brown embellishments, whatever you want to call them, and I'm using, I got a quinacridone in gold with a little blue because it's a little too hot. And I'm just going to be adding, I feel like it needs just a touch of water and mist. More than 3 little squeezes of the trigger is all you need. You don't want to get it too wet because we're drawing now. So we want to just try to get that embellishment in there, and that's I'm feeling good about that. And I'm going to bring some of that brown in and around into some of those areas that are receiving a little light. Okay? So I'm just linking up that back to the front. So meaning the shadow shapes are working with the light shades. Okay? Okay. All right, now here, I'm going to leave this one alone. This probably would have just a little bit of a purple on there. So I'm going to clean this off. Before I do the big one. Let's see. These are the extent of my details in the shadows. Okay. All right, let's go to this area here. I see a little, it's kind of like skimming off the top. There's a little purple there. I'm going to just add a tiny bit just to give it some interest. That's about it. I can't go back and change the shape at all, but I can make it colorful.
Bill, anytime you'd like to take a break?
I can just work with it. I'm used to this with my classes. Okay. Although, maybe it's good that people want to come up and see the progress. So we can break now for like 5 minutes or so, I guess, right? You guys want to do that? Okay, let's do it. Okay. I know, because I can just go right through. All right, we're going to take a little break. 5 minutes? What, how long? 5? 10? 5?
25 and I'm okay.
Yeah, what I do is just to keep my paint workable and wet, you just spray, especially just before you start painting. It just brings all the colors back into the mixture. And so we're going to still need a little bit of that color there. And now we're going to do this part here. You guys can see that.
So close, I thought they did that one too. That's how close.
Yeah, but you guys can see that okay, right? All right, so now I'm gonna bring the, start with the colors. Okay, I'm gonna do the color again. I want to try to get the big brush. I think this is the jumbo. Okay, so now, we're gonna do a big wash here. And, that's burnt sienna. Yellow ochre.
I'm still learning that.
Okay. Now, we have a pretty good sized mouth.
Goes right to the top.
So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna try to get the color and the value, hopefully in one shot. If not, we're gonna just try to get a dry brush working here. Because I want to try to get as much texture on the side of that as possible. So what I have to do to get the dry brush to work better is just use more pigment, okay? So it's one of those things where if you want a good dry brush effect, it can't be too washy. It has to have some, the ratio of water to pigment has to be more pigment to water, okay? So I'm just toning down, again, that brown. I want to keep the brown, but I don't want to get it too bright. Okay, so, let's see. Here we go. That's what I'm looking for. All right, so that, just a little bit more. All right, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just create some dry brush effects in and around the, you see, like keeping it, so we have like these white spots coming through, and we have some dry brush in between. So I'm just trying to arbitrarily put some of that dry brush in so that we have something that looks like a texture, okay? That's going to be like light glare, whatever. What I also want to do is I want to have a smaller one right here. Another thing I think what I did with this, now be careful because I think this is the opposite side of this paper. So, because I think there was a big stain on the other side, so I think that was the, that's why I used this one. That's what I was looking for. Okay. Now, obviously we can't do any more dry brushing, but we can put in some shapes. Now I'm going to go back to my blue. Now you notice this was still from the same blue that we used for the sky. Right? So it's still in operation. Okay? So I'm just looking for some base colors in here. Maybe along the bottom, I want to get some really nice, intense shadow shapes in here. I want to use that brown. I want to get up here, bringing this up here. Okay, so just leaving a little bit of the light coming through there. And I get rid of that altogether. But for now, I want to bring the eye back into the picture, so I'm going to darken this side. I'm going to add a lot of burnt umber to this mixture, which is basically, it's still cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber. So now, so this is where I can start making my shapes. Now, I'm seeing a little blooming here, and I want to put an end to that. So I'm going to probably make that a harder edge. Okay, right there is starting to happen. And I'm going to bring this all the way up. Now the reason why this is drying, because I started out in the dry brush mode, right? So that's why it's not staying wet. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to get a color. So I'm looking for like that goldish orange color here. Relatively thick.
You have to go to the school, right?
So I'm trying to put those colors in nice and thick right here. And then right at that edge, okay, where it picks up light the most, we're going to have a nice bright light in here. I don't want it to have the same intensity all the way through. That's another thing too, like wherever you have, like in here for instance, see, now watercolor paint, we can't go back in and reshape this. So we have to try to, make sure that our shapes are relatively natural if we're doing an outdoor scene like this. So, because we can't change the contour, but we can add color and we can add value, okay? So if I wanted to start adding a little bit more interest in these rocks, just again, to break up the shapes, to make a little more interest, you'll hear me say that a lot, that's what we're going to do, okay? Now, while this dries, we're going to go back and I'm going to add just a few more little striations here in the rocks. It's not really abstract, and it is the form. Let's see, I want to get a little bit more intense here. Now this we can put a lot of little things like this. This is where I am kind of looking at the picture, but I'm also looking at my design too. And so maybe I want to make this look like it's lighter, right? So I'll go darker in this area. And while it's still a little on the wet side, I can pull off some of the paint just a little bit. Now, I'm not looking to copy everything on that rock. If I did, it would look, it might look good like 10 hours from now. It's not going to look good now, that's for sure. Yeah, so you got to know, especially, let's say we were actually here and we're sitting in a kayak or a boat or whatever, and how I'm working right now is exactly how I would paint if I was outdoors. And it's just as fast, too. So, it's the economy of the color, getting the shapes down very quickly. Now, a good place to practice this kind of painting, where you have a lot of bluffs, is actually out in Montauk, okay? Go to Camp Hero, In the summertime, just walk along, you can access the beach, I think, through Turtle Cove, and you'll have these shapes right before your eyes. Just be careful, there's a lot of erosion. Always keep looking up. All right, so we got a lot of contrast here. And that's pretty much, that's good. All right, so, now like we did before, now I'm gonna paint on top of this, but before I do, I think I might want to throw in some more dry brush texture here and there. Now always be careful because you can't go over, if you go over dry brush more than once, it's no longer dry brush. If you can see the palette, it's very inky. That's the consistency of good dry brush. So let's say I want to get something running down here. All right? I just painted about 1 billion little rocks in one brush stroke. So that's what you want to do, right? Again, you want to binge watch your favorite shows. Okay? And now we see some of that light coming through, which is fine. I mean, there's light here. So now what I'm going to do is now, since I have the texture I need, I'm going to go over everything like I did here. So now I want to start making embellishments, but I don't want them to look so hard-edged. So I'm going to just wet this a little bit, and I'm going to go back to my dark color here, okay? Now, I don't have to mix anything new. Again, you want to stick with the mother color, right? I know that sounds weird, but it's the intrinsic color. There's usually, when you see a landscape, especially on like, hazy days, there's usually like one color that predominates. A good example of that is that artist Joseph Zubik. I can't pronounce his name, but he's amazing. He really gets the light effect. The critics say, though, he's more monochromatic than he's color. But the thing is, that technique I was telling you guys about before, where he's like a master of using the dirty complementary color, and then usually there's one spot in his painting that's usually a very bright color. And like I said before, Sargent does the same thing too, did the same thing in his compositions. Especially the painting of the little boy with the red bow. Perfect example of that. But that's been done through, and if you looked at Sargent's watercolors, he also carries that through a lot. And it really helps with a good composition, or even just in his sketches, he just did it instinctually. Because you can't have competing colors in a composition. I say you can't, but it's usually more pleasing. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, I can get this a little squirt, because I was running at the mouth a little bit too much. So now we're going to start putting in some more little striations in the mountain. Okay, now this is where I can start adding some more color too. So, now this color is going to just sit on top of the other color, right? So, but I don't want it to be, again, I don't want it to overpower. I just want it there to show that there is color coming down the mountains. And then right over that white, maybe I'll put a little bit of color over that. I don't want to lose a lot of that dry brushing, and I'm not. You can still see it underneath the wash. But let's say right in here, I wanted to put, maybe I'll make this a dry brush. Let's get a little dry. All right, but I'm just building texture. Now what I think I need in here is a little cool tone. So I'm going to go to my go-to cerulean blue and see if I can get just a little something in this shadow. Now I know I have to go darker in there too, so let me go dark first. Ultramarine blue, I'm making a black burnt umber, okay? You guys can see that right in here? It's pretty thick, it's inky. All right, so here. Now, notice the way I'm putting the paint down. I'm not going like this. I'm like, okay, I gotta get that shape. No, you just put big strokes down, right? Because the boldness of that stroke, the way you're applying the paint, is the way it's going to dry. You want to put it down in a powerful way, especially in areas like this where you have to go dark. And then let's say you wanted to do some interesting things now with these edges. Now I can come across here. I can do a little drawing, but I'm not gonna do too much. Okay, that's probably the extent of what I'm going to be doing in that section as far as breaking up the light and dark. So here, though, I do want to get a little coolness in there. So I'm going to go back to that cerulean blue hue, whatever it's called. This is very, very wet, and I'm just going to put a little bit of haze in here. Okay. Now, if let's say I want to move around a little bit more, and I didn't do this at all at night tonight, but when I'm working at home, you got to hold your, I'll do stuff like this when I'm moving it around, and I probably put a little too much in here, but I'm moving that paint around so it's there and it's going to dry. You're going to actually see that blue sitting on top of that color because it does have a little opacity to it, but I got to go back in here and restate that dark. That's the one thing I do have to do. And I'm just going to put that dark mass right in here. And just let it sit. That's it. Probably. That's all I need to do on that front in here. And maybe I'll bring it down a little bit. But I don't want to play with it too much. So I'm going to move away from that. So now I have this dark here. It's drawing our eye back into the picture. And if I want to use that same color in some of these striations up here, definitely just use them, bring them down, just what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring the eye back into the picture. One thing I should have done, and now that I'm seeing this, is working out the linear interest of this painting. I should have probably made this slope a little bit more this way, like it's a little too abrupt, right? But I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But that's one thing that sometimes you'll look at something and you'll say, you know what, I probably could have gone out just a little bit more on that shape. With watercolor, unfortunately, we can't, like oil, it's no problem. You just start painting it out. I could scrub, and I can show you guys how to do some of that stuff too. But if you want to try to keep your paintings looking fresh, try not to scrub too much. I know there's going to be times when you need to do it. And what do I mean by scrubbing? All right, so let's say I have a scrub brush. And all a scrub brush is really is you just go to Michael's and get the cheap brushes and you just cut, you make them like these little stubby brushes. You see, can you guys see that? And what I can do, let's say I wanted to, let's say I want to scrub that. That looks like a mistake. You can actually erase to a certain degree. Not too much, but you can do a little bit. All right. And as long as your water, because what you're really doing is you're scraping off the gum arabic, which is the coating that they put on watercolor paper. All right, so we got that out of the way. Now we can do, I'm going to just dry this off. This is going to get a little lighter. Now we do the water. Hopefully you can get some nice dry brush effects in the water too. Now I'm seeing as I'm looking at this, right, I'm seeing that I could probably put some hues in here, but I'm going to hold off. Just to break up all the ground, because I want to get the water down. So, so the little people in here, we're going to just paint right over them, and there are ways like we can scratch some of the lights out on them, but they're going to be pretty much silhouetted. The only colors that we're going to see are the colors of the kayak, the body of the kayak, the hull, which again is red and yellow. We may have to go over that with a little bit of an opaque color. But I'm happy with the tone in here. This looks okay. If I want to, one thing I do want to do is just get some of that light effect a little bit more pronounced on. Mistake. Alright, always test your brushes. And don't leave your brushes in the water too long either. If you want to keep them going for a long time. Little orange. Okay, now this is just, it's basically like we're just glazing. See, in the watercolor, I mean, it's not really called glazing, although some watercolor artists call it glazing. It's just running a color over an existing color, but it's another wash. Okay, you can call it what you want, but it does enhance some of those colors, and I want to pick up some of those colors here as well. Just leaving a little bit of that white coming through. I'm also going to show you too, before we do finish this, is how to get some effects, like light effects. Where, actually I do it now, because I see a perfect area for it. So let's say you're looking at something, right, and there's glare. Let's say there's glare on the bluff or something, and we want to try to get this effect of the light hitting that side. There was an amazing watercolor. I don't know if she's still alive. She was from Chicago. Her name was Nita Engel, and she did these amazing watercolors with this beautiful shaft of light. So what we're going to do is we're going to power wash. Okay, for those my students know what this is. It's really messy, but it's effective. And so I'm going to pick a spot. So let's say I want to get this spot right here to look like it has like a little sun, like just hitting the edge of it. So what I'll do is I'll just take my my spray bottle, and I'm just going to literally just spray it out like that, okay? And then all of a sudden, as long as I grab it before it starts to, to stain, I get this little effect of light, okay, right there. Okay, and you can do it anywhere. You can do it down here. But you do have to, and you're not really controlling it. It's kind of doing what it's going to do. And if let's say you go a little too light, you just bring back the wash. But I like the way that looks like there's some, I don't know, dissipation, some mist or something in the sky, in that area right there. And you could put it on, let's see, I'll do it over here too. So and I just have to do it facing down. But you guys can see. So right here, now I do have to hold it this way because my spray bottle won't spray upside down. But be careful, you got to really get rid of that effect right away, because what will happen is you'll get a line in your painting. So now I have these little effects now. I can probably do one up here too. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but let's say I want to get this a little brighter. You can almost see the pigment coming off, right? We're power washing.
Wow.
In the winter. Isn't that cool? And now, is that cheating? No.
No.
It's getting a desired effect. So anything that will make the painting look more interesting, I felt that that needed to be lighter because it's up there in the corner. Let's see, okay, so let's do the water now. So we gotta clean up all our stuff, and we're still gonna use this mud, all right? So basically, this whole paintings, that was sort of like the tie-in color for everything that we painted. The sky, the rocks, the background. Any questions so far?
Do you ever scrape with a razor blade?
Yes, I do. Especially when I'm doing sailboats, and you have to get those little lines, the rigging. All right, so now, if you haven't noticed yet, I don't use wet into wet, ever. I use the color. Again, the color is, just using the wet onto dry is probably the best way. It keeps the paint, thick. It keeps it more intense than if we did wet into wet. Plus the wet into wet, depends on what you're doing. Like if you were doing like a soft vignette, then definitely use wet into wet. And you can just continue to, just drop color in, and you can do like abstracted shapes and things. But for this, we're gonna just go and make we're gonna kind of make a terra. So what I did here, I did do this in Photoshop where this was actually lighter. This was actually more like the painting, the initial painting, and I felt like your eye was just going right off the page. Okay, just like, you have to have something that's going to bring your eye back in. So I made this a little darker, and we're going to probably make like I don't know, I'm thinking maybe a hooker's green with a little yellow. So I'm going to use my big soaker brush. Make sure I go, and you know what?
Clean water.
Yeah, this water is shot. Because now, I have another, thank you. I have this other. Right. Okay, so now we're going to cook some sausage. We're going to start with a quart of water. Some pork sausages. All right. Hope they don't use this for cooking. Yeah. Yeah. Like at home, I got this big bucket. It's like this big, and I use that because it's it's kind of like the parts per million concept, where if you have so much water, the water's good. It's going to take a lot longer to get dirty than a small container, especially when you're working larger too. All right, so let's get those colors. So I said we'll go back to the other. You can put that there. Put this back here as a backup. Thank you. All right, so we're going to do green, but we can't go that green, right? That's going to look crazy. So what do? We take that mother color again. Notice how it's been like, sort of like the lifeblood of this painting. Even though it's this ugly color, it's helping us keep those colors together, relating them to one another. Even the browns, to some extent, were tinged by that that mother color, that mixture we've been using right there. Now, I think I have to make more, because you always have to look at how far you got to go across. And looking at this, sorry. Sorry, yeah, I should actually have that tape down. Okay, so let's get the big one out, because we want to make a big shape. Since we don't have anything on there yet, we might have to just do an initial wash. And now I know this is weird, and what the people in the front row, just put your raincoats on. Like that. Okay, right here. Now, that's probably, I want to do any more to that, because there's certain things that I like about this, and I want to start getting this now a little darker. So, I'm going to hit that burnt umber and the hooker's green, get it really nice and dark in here, and I'm just going to run that across. Okay. Now, before I leave this, I'm going to hold it this way. Thanks, Tony. Now this is where you just kind of, you have to let the water kind of do what it's going to do. I'm just going to take the excess stuff right here out. Okay. It's actually underneath that tape.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff there, right?
Yeah.
And you could bang it. Okay. That'll wake up some of the spirits in the same place, right? I'm just acting out. I haven't had dinner yet. Because I had to talk about the sausage. I planted a seed. Yeah. So. All right. So we have some little dry brushing happening in here. This might require a couple of hits. What happens too now, the board actually starts getting a little wavy, so the paper gets a little wavy, so we gotta be careful. But we kind of got the color of the background a little bit. We may have to go over it again, just to get a little bit more color interest in here. So if you don't get it the first time, it's okay. I think there is a little bit of yellow too. Just adding yellow to green always enhances it, especially green at a higher intensity or higher value. It just kind of gets a little bit more chromatic. So don't be afraid to use it in situations like this. So, yeah. Okay, good. I got the effect I wanted over there, and now I'm going to get this a little darker in the foreground. Okay, so you noticed I went for the sap green, but I went right into the burnt umber right away, because I want that to be, yeah, see how dark that is? It's not so much the darkness, but the color. Now, this kind of helps it move back and forth a little bit. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Watch that edge. Now, there are other ways that we can go back. I think this is fine right now. And I don't want to, we're going to be painting in the people too. But I kind of like this dark right now. if you did want to do anything to this, there are other ways like, and I don't, you know what, I don't really want to do this. Let's see. You can take the brush and take some of the paint off and bring it back and forth, but I don't want, I think this is fine. You can also take a credit card if you wanted to make any lines. I'm only saying that because I might want to take the color out here where the two kayakers are. So now since there's already, yeah, it's not going to work. It says there's already a. I gotta be careful too, because again, when we do this, we're taking some of that pigment off. I'm sorry, the coating off the paper, and we can make it worse. Okay, so I'm not gonna play with that. I'm gonna leave that alone. Now all we have to do is put the people in, the kayakers. And here I might have to cheat a little and use a little bit of I use Pro White. Pro White is a very opaque white. It's more opaque than wash painting. And there's also, I think there's another brand called, I think it's Dr. Martin's White. It comes in this little jar. And Dr. Martin's is the company that makes the dyes. I don't know if, you know, like the commercial artists used to put red dye in the pens and so forth. All right, so. Okay, so now, where would I use this? I'm going to pick out, so I gotta find a spot on my palette that's cleaner than normal. And so I have a little bit of the dry brushing in here. If I was gonna take this to a more of a finish, I would probably like tighten up some of these areas in here. Maybe like, I don't know, gets the shape of those trees a little bit more. Just a little detail, but not too much. The one thing I will do though is just do a little something to that the lighthouse. Just add a little dark to it. Remember there's some detail, but not too much. We're just really putting in these lines. That's it. What I would probably do is on one side, just make them a little lighter, just to break it up. Okay, so that. Actually, if you wanted to, you can add a little blue to that too. Just a little bit. So I have to think about the rest of this. I think just adding a little bit of blue sends it back just a little bit more. thing. And so yeah, if I had a straight edge, I probably would scrape out a little bit, but there's just so much you can scrape out. So what I'm trying to do is I'm here, now I do have to go to my smallest brush, which is a number 8, for those taking notes. And I'm gonna add just a little white, and I'm gonna use, you know, the reddest red I have, and which is cadmium red. And these are the things where, yeah, you know what, this could probably be a little intense. What happens with, whenever we put opaque paint over a watercolor wash, I don't know if any of you guys ever worked in gouache before. Like a lot of gouache, and I used to do it in illustration, where you would take, you would actually do your underpainting with gouache, but then after a while your painting becomes opaque because you're adding more and more opaque watercolor. That's really what gouache is. And then all of a sudden you're just using some of the washes as like background. So here what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to get my color intensity up. We're going to make the back one red, and I'm going to see if I can get this one to be a little more yellow. I'm trying to just make, I'm really not going to mess with the shapes too much. Okay, I'm really just painting a line there. There's not much to these things. There's not. I think it's only about 8 inches from the water surface. Okay, so now we got to do the background, the front one. I think a little bit more yellow. We could probably just use the yellow right out of the tube, but to make it opaque, we're going to add a little bit of the Pro White, and I'm only adding tiny bits of it, not too much. Okay, so. Basically a shape, and there's one back there that's kind of blue, so we're going to grab some of that bright blue, as blue as it's going to get, with white added here. Since we're keeping this a little on the loose side, I don't want to belabor it. Now we are going to put a little form on this guy. We're going to have some a little down plane and a little top plane, and then the people. So I'm going to go back to the yellow, and a little bit more white to that. This is where, gotta be careful. It's going a little bit of yellow just on top here. Chasing that shape around, so I'm going to let that dry. All right, now the red boat, we're going to get a little intense on that red. I actually have, I don't even know, I think it's like a quinacridine orange, which is really, really, really intense. I'm going to add that to the white. Sometimes when you try to make I mean, red only gets as red is, right? Like you can't, like, let's say it's a cadmium red, you can't get any redder than that. If you're painting a rose, that's the red you start with, and you just get that red darker. But with using a little bit of this stuff, I don't know what it is, it's a little stronger. So I'm just gonna make another little line here, kind of represent the top plane. Now I'm adding these little embellishments with the opaque paint because I really I could not get any color unless I used the masking fluid. And what you would do in that case is you would paint out. But what happens then is, like, if your shapes aren't exact, it's going to look weird. You got to be careful. You have no control over the form at all. All right, so now we're going to make a little, it does, so you're better off staying away from it and just, scratching it out. I know some people, in watercolor painting, there's like this hierarchy. There's some people that say, oh, you should never use whiteout, you should never use like that masking fluid, you should paint around the form. It's just endless, I know Antonio Massi, he paints right on gesso paint. He puts gesso over his, I think he uses like 300-pound cold press. And like that can't be any more unconventional. And he's like the president of the Watercolor Society, right? So, you can't, and his work is beautiful. And I think he does that because it makes the paint more intense. Like, because there is, with watercolor, yeah, we can get it really bright if you want to go that route. But there is, because of the transparency, we can only get intense enough. Because what happens is the coating that they put on it just takes so much. If you've ever done a watercolor where you just went one wash too much, it almost repels it. It just kind of like, it doesn't sit on it anymore, right? So, but I think by the use of the gesso, you can continue to add more and more color. So. Now, I'm going to try to make a little shadow as fast as I can. Unfortunately, this is what happens now. At the end of the night, no, because my surface now is wavy, so I have to kind of, so what I have to do, this is where I would, okay, so if I was to do this to finish, I would probably put this, and this is what I do. Actually, I'm working on these watercolor commissions of Italy, and what I do is while I'm working on them, and all of a sudden, my big, because they're about this size, they start getting wavy. I'm like, what do I have to do now when I have to start putting in the little windows and the villas and stuff like that? I'm going to have all this wavy stuff happening. What I do is I wet the back. I have this it's cork casement. And it's just like a cork board, right? And I put it against 2 pieces of plywood, and then I put it together, and I either put it under my couch, or I put something heavy on it, really heavy, and the next day when it dries, it's flat as a board again, okay? Now you probably wonder, well, why don't you just stretch the board? Because for some reason, I don't like the stretching. And I found too, when I stretched my paper, I would say board, I stretch the paper, that always happens even with stretch paper, and I don't like stapling it, because I'd rather just work on something like this a little bit more natural. And just know that if I do this and foresee where those bellies, those hills and valleys are going to be, then I'm okay. I'm just going to run another line right there. So we have those little, and this one's so far back, I don't even see a shadow, but I'm going to draw one anyway. Just a little something there. And now, can I put more waves and stuff? Definitely. And but I'm not. I'm going to work on the people, and then I guess we'll call it a night. I think. What are we doing? 9/11. All right. So now I'm going to just start to make some people color. Probably just the blue. They look pretty dark.
If you use 310 paper though, you don't even have.
No,
to
that's
stretch
true.
it.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I should really start using that. So, all right, so
But it's really heavy duty.
it's very, yeah, you can definitely do a lot with that paper. All right, so the people, I'm just doing their little silhouettes in here. They are pretty dark against the background. You see a little paddle. I want to try to keep them very impressionistic. Okay, just little dots. Like usually, like here, these guys are wearing. They look like foul weather here. Number two.
Bill, anytime you want to stop.
Yeah, I'm almost done. Just 1 minute. And then right here. We got another little guy in here. This other guy looked like he was. Okay, we'll just put All right, I'm just putting these little oars in. All right. There you go. This guy might look a little too dark. Lighten him up. He's definitely too dark. All right. So if they look like they're breaking, breaking the picture plane up too much, just pounce them out. Get them a little. It's better to have them a little lighter than a little darker because you don't want them to be too contrasted. And let's see. I think we're pretty done. Okay, if I was to add a little bit of water to like just some lines of water, I'd probably just start going like this, just very quickly. Okay, little lines. And you have to do wet onto dry because, well, it has to look like a line. Okay. And obviously, the closer those lines are, the bigger they're going to be. The further away, the smaller. And what's kind of cool about this is that that color that we put in before, right? That color is in the water, right? So we didn't really have to do too much to that, right? If I just wanted to add some little things here, some little accents, I just watch my edges a little bit more. Let's see, in here probably just a little bit more of a maybe a dry brush effect here. And let's see, I would probably go back with a little bit of that. Now this is the blue. I'm trying to get a mist in here. And then we'll call it just a little. So I just put a little water in there. And I just want that little mist coming off the water right here. And that's it.
There we go.